happens. And then we have this again. Sorry, guys. 1 second. I'm going to give you a brief content warning while I'm trying to get this set up. Brief and respectful reference is going to be made to Aaron Swartz. Abusers in the digital security space will also be mentioned, and abusers' behaviors will be discussed in the abstract. Where possible, I'm going to try to mitigate this with cats, as we do as is the way of our people. Good morning. Thanks for coming to your biennial Dr. Gus homily on human complications and meat body stuff. Thank you. I know I have some regulars here. My theme today is, how did we get here? So what do I mean by the hacker mystique? Title of my talk is The Problem with the Hacker Mystique. What do I mean by that? I'm going to use pop culture to illustrate, with the caveat that, yes, I know hackers are not exactly what the media think we are, but the media do foreground some of the same things that drew us to hacking. For example, in this episode of the kids show Ghostwriter, there are some themes which I think are worth teasing out as we try to reckon with, oh man, I am going to need audio on this. Do we have audio? Are we cool? Sweet. Yeah, it's on the lectern. It should be. I'm in the HDMI on the lectern. Okay. Oh, 1/8 inch? Okay, sorry. More things. There we go. There's one of those. It plugs in here. This is actually moving quite smoothly. There we go. Sorry about that. Forgot what I needed. So in this episode of the kids show Ghostwriter, there's a couple of themes which I think are worth teasing out as we try to reckon with what it means to be a hacker, which parts we value, and which parts we maybe want to rethink. So here's the clip.
Do you know anything about hackers? Can you jam with the console cowboys in cyberspace?
What?
Ever read Neuromancer?
Huh?
Ever experienced the new wave? Next wave? Dream wave? Or cyberpunk? I didn't think so. I'll handle the hacker stories.
Yeah, I guess you should. We can learn about all this hacker stuff.
In there. It's a world where you're judged by what you say and think, not by what you look like. A world where curiosity and imagination equals power. We need more paper. Let's go, people. Work with me here. Work with me.
Computer, you're the only one who understands me. All right, so the writer of this episode probably came from outside the hacker community, I'm guessing, but he knew enough to reflect it back to us like this. Hacking is appealing because it calls us back to a world where skill matters, and all the imitations of our looks, our bodies, and our social skills fall away. That same appeal is referred to in this still from the movie Hackers. If you will please move to my next slide. Thank you very much. So if you take a look over on the right here, that sign that they've pasted up on the right, always yield to the hands-on imperative, is an observation Stephen Levy made in his study of hackers, the earliest computer hackers at MIT. Those hackers believed the best way to learn was to get hands-on, to take things apart, and to see how they work. Levy distilled another lesson from the earliest hackers this way. Hackers should be judged by their hacking, not by bogus criteria such as degrees, age, race, or position. That was the ethos of the earliest hackers at MIT. The mainstream of the internet is about image and appearance today. Everyone has a profile photo, if not whole Instagram feeds or YouTube channels. Social norms have invaded the internet in a way that the builders of the internet never really intended to happen. But hacking, unlike mainstream internet use, hacking is still ostensibly about skill, right? And about learning about the power of technology itself. It's about escaping from boundaries and norms. This is why a lot of us are here. Some of us were not much older than the kids on Ghostwriter when we got involved with Hope or in hacking. I just want to note we have a apparently 12-year-old Matt Blaze in the center there. Future lawyer Alex Urbellis in the upper right there. Jason Scott before he grew a hat. And Lady Ada apparently started in the scene very, very early there. Many other people much younger. So we were not much older than those kids when we got involved in Hope or hacking. We were attracted by the freedom that hacking offered us, or by the thrill of getting away with crossing boundaries. A lot of us are older now. I believe all of us who were here are older now. The question is whether we stayed, right? For some of us, hacking is now work, leaving us with a quandary. Do we still call you by your handle at work? Do we call you Mr. the Plague? For others of us, hacking in this conference are still all play or activism. As our roles change, what are our goals for being at this conference? Are they different from newcomers' goals for the conference? What do we owe each other, newcomers and old heads? I want to call your attention to something else from that Ghostwriter clip. Miss New Wave, Next Wave, Dream Wave there was throwing around jargon. She wasn't sharing information about the supposedly cool things that she was into. She was intimidating by showing off other things that the other kid didn't know. The scriptwriter knew that hackers had a bunch of privileged information, and he saw the romance in that. There's a just out of reach allure to it. He also knew some hackers aren't above making people feel excluded or less than because they're not down with the knowledge. I want us to think about a couple of themes in pop culture representations of hacking and in our own hacking communities. Hacking is sexy. Hacking is thrilling because it breaks boundaries. Hackers find and exploit vulnerabilities. We pick locks. Whether we're white hat or black hat, we demonstrate the limits of the law and the limits of safety. And that makes for actual physical arousal, fear or excitement, as well as an edgy image that has drawn many of us to hacking. Hacking is secretive. Hacking's domain is secret protected information. In some cases, the information is private, or an elect group of people are supposed to have access to it. They're the only ones who are supposed to have access to the information that, as people working in information security, we seek or protect. In other cases, like cryptography, very few people understand the subject matter. And the end result is a small number of people who have power that others do not. And this is a problem. Whether we hack for play or work, I'm going to argue that we need to give up the sexiness of hacking and the mystique of secrecy in order to survive as a community. That sexiness and secretiveness can be exploited for abuse, both by bad actors among us and by nefarious external political and government forces. The more we play up secrecy, boundary-breaking thrills, and the power dynamics those entail, the more likely our communities are to be taken down by our own flaws and by those who would exploit them. Instead, we need to return to valuing the actual work that individual hackers do. Pardon me. In No More Rock Stars, a thoughtful piece they wrote a few years back, Lee Honeywell, Mary Gardner, and Valerie Aurora made a similar plea. They led with this quote: "Rock stars are arrogant narcissists. Plumbers keep us all from getting cholera. Build functional infrastructure, be a plumber." They noted that abusers in tech often excuse their boundary violations as individual eccentricity or as part of a utopian vision for societal change, or in some cases genius, another term that we need to stop throwing around because, among other things, Steve Jobs was notoriously abusive to those around him, for example. Often, our community accepts these excuses and lets them slide. I want to exhort everyone here, personally, to resist efforts to treat any member of our community as a celebrity. We need to stop with the cult of tech genius. We need to build more networks of trust involving working people, not networks of hype surrounding celebrities. Let's delve into this deeper. I mentioned that hacking breaks boundaries, and what do I mean by that? So here's an example. It was recently proposed that there would be voter registration at DEF CON, prompting consternation from many of us. One friend of mine summed up her frustration with this proposal beautifully. The reason hackers are so notoriously bad at consent is because they regard violating boundaries as an implicit social good. This is something each hacker needs to ask themselves. Do I think that violating social boundaries is inherently good? All boundaries? All the time? If we set violating any and all boundaries as true north on our compasses, can we ever draw back and say, no, this boundary, this one boundary, must not be violated? We have language for thinking about this in hacking already: white hat and black hat. White hat hackers are understood to hack for good, to be ethical in which boundaries they choose to violate. Black hat hackers are seen as having no ethics, willing to break into systems for personal gain or work for the highest bidder. So like I said, I think each of us needs to take time, think hard, and be explicit with ourselves. Why are we violating a boundary? And what are we accomplishing by violating it? Let's break down what happens when a boundary is violated. Sometimes it is calling society into question. Sometimes it's tied to secrecy and power. Sometimes it's related to marginalization. And sometimes it's potentially putting those involved in legal jeopardy. And frequently, it's exciting. So what do I mean? By calling society into question, much of the well-known work of 2600 Magazine and free software efforts have pushed the boundaries of copyright law under the belief that knowing how things work empowers everyday citizens who would otherwise be ruled by corporations whose interest is profit, not human growth and understanding. Queer communities also push the boundaries of gender and sexuality so that we can all live safely and comfortably with ourselves the way we were born and love who we love. How are boundaries tied to secrecy and power? Boundaries can keep people away from information, privileging those who have access to it. Secrecy has been one of the themes of hacking. We work with tools like encryption, which protects secrecy, and tools like WikiLeaks, which shatter it. Secrecy can make it so that security experts have power, which others lack. Boundaries can marginalize or be a tool of the marginalized. Boundaries and centers of power define marginalization. Those who are already on the margins of society may ignore boundaries because they have nothing to gain by staying within them. Again, queer communities have had less investment in maintaining existing boundaries about self-representation and sexuality. There are also now boundaries in place, like code of conduct policies, which are there to declare that we don't want people to be marginalized based on who they are. Boundaries potentially put those involved in legal jeopardy. If the boundary in question is legal, it's about copyright or election protection or about laws about financial fraud, the people violating the boundaries may risk being jailed. This overlaps with other aspects I've mentioned. Copyright violation may call society into question, but still carry legal risk. Same with leaking secrets. And boundaries are exciting. Violating boundaries and taboos on a very basic physical level raises our adrenaline level. It makes our entire system excited or aroused. We're aware of the risk that we may be caught crossing a boundary and may be punished for it. Much as we might want to be cyborgs, we're actually chemborgs. Our physical and neurological chemistry colors everything we do. So excitement and adrenaline raise the stakes of all of these other aspects of boundary violation. With the exception of legal jeopardy, these are generally the upsides of boundary violation. It's exciting, it's powerful, it helps us change society. But even the upsides are sometimes abused. The work we do is most dangerous when it attracts people who are inclined to abuse power, trust, to abuse those who are marginalized, sex and sexiness. In the past few years, we have learned over and over that hacking and tech have attracted just such abusers. Here in the hacker community, Captain Crunch, Jacob Applebaum, who keynoted here at Hope, Julian Assange, Morgan Marquis-Boire. In the Perl community, Michael Schwern. In the tech freedom community, Ali Bangui. They use their knowledge of technology to gain advantage over others and wield personal power over them. Let me go into what their abuse and others' abuse of boundaries looks like. We have sort of a circular problem when it comes to secrecy and trust in the hacker community. Our work or our play is both about secrecy and requires secrecy of us. We build tools for secrecy and trust and explain how they work. We provide secrecy for others, and we often need to trust experts in this space to tell us who and what to trust. Some information about hacking-related technology isn't secret, it's just really hard for everyday people to understand. Take cryptography. There's a very limited number of experts out there who can judge how likely it is that a cryptographic scheme is vulnerable, or explain this graph to you, for that matter. Beyond that small circle, there's also a limited number of people with the security expertise to understand if crypto protocols have been deployed well. Most of us have few grounds for evaluating the security claims they make. When I say most of us, I maybe mean less people in the hacker space, but the rest of the world. In the few years after the Snowden leaks, I saw the limited sharing of expertise and the limited definition of expertise result in people being less secure. At the Open Internet Tools Project, we introduced secure communications tools to journalists and activists abroad. We use Signal, Tor, and the GPG Tools suite, among others. And we often failed to convince these journalists and activists to adopt these tools. These journalists and activists were novices in tech, but they were experts in living their own lives under extreme duress. They were being jailed in Vietnam and Ethiopia for the crime of blogging about the government. Sometimes on computers they shared with their whole families, often running decades-old Windows. They were covering the war in Syria, and their pages were being shut down by Facebook for showing gore, because there was murder on the streets of Syria. When free software militants insisted that journalists wipe their shared family computers and install secure Linux variants, the activists and journalists knew this wasn't an option for them, and they kept using their bootlegs. When privacy and security fanatics exhorted them to delete their Facebook accounts, they threw out that advice because that's where they were storing the documentation of war crimes, and they knew how large their audience was. Nothing but Facebook could give them that. The developers making the software, by contrast, took a long time to both learn and value these users' expertise. They kept insisting, we can't simplify this idea about public keys, or mobiles are hopelessly insecure. And the result was software so complicated and foreign to users that they abandoned it, or they used it wrong and their security was back to square one. Part of our problem here is what they call contempt culture. Hackers may think that we're liberated from social boundaries, but when it comes to your operating system or the programming language you use, I bet your social currency with your friends involves what's? Displays of contempt for Windows users, Windows losers, harsh words for people who believe they're writing secure JavaScript. We don't even think about how our culture is based on demonstrating we're smarter than others. A few Python developers have pointed out that language shaming of PHP tends to be directed at people who come to programming through the non-traditional path of working on WordPress or Drupal installations, a group which is disproportionately female. Language shaming may have knock-on effects on who feels comfortable showing up in our spaces, and it's worth making efforts to counter this. You may not have noticed, but Hope's Code of Conduct specifically welcomes everyone, regardless of text editor choice, to avoid this. Mr. Stallman. A harm reduction approach would have been more effective for the activists we were working with, or software that was based on their knowledge of what their situation on the ground was and not contemptuous of their operating system choices that they made for financial reasons. Fortunately, the community working on these tools has moved in that direction since then. They are doing a lot more to understand the situation on the ground, but prioritizing developers' expertise over that of the people using the software puts lives at risk. Limited expertise is most dangerous when newcomers to the community hang on celebrities and experts, believing that those celebrities and experts have access to knowledge the rest of us can't possibly fathom. When we act like security is unknowably hard and only to be handled by insiders, we prepare the groundwork, each of us, for newcomers to be groomed and preyed upon by charlatans and abusers. We build missing stairs. We were reminded of our dependence on experts when it became clear that it was dangerous to have let Jake, Morgan, and Ali into our spaces because they were physically and sexually abusing people. Some may have felt it wasn't worth giving up these men's expertise and felt inclined to protect them. In this way, centralized expertise becomes a community vulnerability. When we act like security is just an expert domain, we encouraged learned helplessness. How do I shoo? I don't know how to shoo. I can't use this technology. When we emphasize the boundary between our expertise and lay people's ignorance, we may think that we're teaching them how to think like hackers, but we're not. Hacking was never about encouraging people to defer to authority. We need to not shame people for where they're starting from, technically. We need to give people the tools and the leeway to push back on the boundaries we have set around our own expertise. So, more on boundaries and marginalization. Here's how people get marginalized. Many of us in the hacker community are, in one way or another, already marginalized. We already have an outsider's relationship with social boundaries. Just appearing to be a hacker can put you on the wrong side of legal boundaries, as many of us have experienced. Plenty of us are not neurotypical. We fall in the autism or ADD spectrums. Some of us are also queer or part of a kink scene, not to mention those of us who just feel we never fit in anywhere, but we fit in here, and we're hungry for community. Unfortunately, there are boundaries in our communities which are sometimes at cross purposes with each other when it comes to empowering or marginalizing people. We will want to think hard about which boundaries of this sort we want to violate, how, and why. Codes of conduct at conferences, unfortunately, are at this collision of boundaries. Some people want a boundary that keeps sexualized content out of unrelated talks. They want to be able to get through their day. I want to be able to get through my day without our stress levels going through the roof when, out of nowhere, someone suggests women's only reason for being at a conference, or otherwise, is to attract male sexual attention, or that sexual violence is a fair target for jokes. For some people, this may actually trigger post-traumatic stress. Sex-positive activists, meanwhile, may be uncomfortable with a boundary that blanket excludes sexual content. They see that boundary as suggesting that sex is a stigmatized, unacceptable public topic. Women, people of color, queer folks, and folks with disabilities may similarly want a boundary which asks community members to refrain from making derogatory comments about them, similarly to avoid the stress that comes from constantly second-guessing whether people around you secretly think you don't belong here and want you to leave. Free speech activists may want to see that boundary erased. They see completely free speech as an unmitigated good. Generally, they see it as the underpinning of a free society, and setting any boundaries as the beginning of a slippery slope to authoritarianism. These are very hard boundaries to walk when you're trying to organize a conference that welcomes a range of people. Seriously, this is not a fight that any of us picks for fun. It is never any fun. I've been there. It's just always a veil of tears. Comedy writers have terms that can help us, each of us, think about whether we're making boundary violations we ethically believe in. They talk about punching up or punching down. You may be familiar with these terms. When a comic tells a joke about people in power, say someone in government or the head of a corporation, that's punching up. When a comic sticks to jokes about people who are still legitimately the targets of physical, legal, and economic threats, Black Lives Matter, trans folks, and generally people who are targets for just being who they are, that's punching down. Punching up takes a poke at perpetrators. Punching down strikes those who have already been struck, the victims. One comic, talking about how punching down often makes for crappy comedy, had this take on free speech. Sure, you have a right to say whatever you want about anyone, but you don't have a right to a platform. The rest of us are not obligated to give you a platform. Sorry, go stand on your own soapbox. Each of us should ask ourselves this: if the boundary being violated might take individual hackers out of the conversation through personal stress, social exclusion, or even violence, is that a boundary that I really value violating? If so, what is it that I value about that? Is the boundary in question one that is related to something that people can't change about themselves? Their sexuality, their body, their personal history? Do I value allowing others to violate that boundary around me? Or do we not care about causing others stress? Do we say, suck it up, kid, life is stressful, hacking is war? Is it really effective to act like that? Do we make hacker conferences a high-stress environment to continue to drive home to everyone how life and death, how cloak and dagger our work is? Again, that doesn't work. It's more likely to get people to act helpless. Now we're back to the sexy mystique of hacking. Honestly, what does it get us? As individuals, a certain power. As a community, honestly, I just think a lot of drama, heat and noise. Heat and noise come from an inefficient system. So how do we stick to healthy boundary violation and identify when a hacker's boundary violation is becoming abusive? I've talked about the bright side, where boundary pushing hacking has helped us envision new ways of being ourselves and being a society. I think the danger of abuse arises when individual hackers ignore the distinction between individual or societal boundary pushing and interpersonal boundary pushing. In other words, violating consent. And this touches on some of the marginalization, but also on my earlier points about legal jeopardy and excitement. I don't think we need to think about copyright violation or someone biohacking themselves, for example, as indicators of abusiveness. I don't think that's as much of a problem. Copyright violation is punching up. Personal biohacking is somebody's own business. Pushing one-on-one or small group interpersonal boundaries is a more worrying sign. We all need to know what grooming looks like. Not actually this kind of grooming, but it might involve smaller people. And not just because hacking has long been an all ages pursuit, and there are young people among us. Those engaged in domestic abuse also engage in grooming. So do scammers, and so do others who engage in senior abuse. But one of the rock star abusers in our space had a history of forcing people to eat things. When reports came out that he had raped people, this stuck out more as a sign of his trying to overpower people around him. Another abuser violated interpersonal boundaries with constant requests that young men give him massages and do exercises which put them in unwanted physical contact with him. Abusers often target victims who are socially marginalized, already on the outside of boundaries. Like I said, many of us hackers, and people who are relatively powerless. This may make the victims more eager for positive attention and less willing to speak out against their abusers. The person doing the grooming makes their victim feel special, giving the victim a positive feeling and a bond they don't want to give up. Abusers may invite victims to violate social boundaries with them. The adrenaline thrill this produces can be attractive. The results can make the victim feel the abuser is the only one they can talk to, as they may be ashamed or obliged to keep illegal behavior a secret. Abusers alternate between supportive and harmful behaviors, gradually violating more and more boundaries. This overcomes resistance and normalizes their harmful behavior. The authors of No More Rock Stars thus recommend watching for small signs of boundary pushing, as abusers will often try to push boundaries in order to see what they can get away with, letting others excuse it as their eccentricity. They note that rock stars feel entitled to other people's time, work, and bodies, and this may be an indicator that they feel entitled to other things, like credit for work that others did, or an organization's finances. No More Rock Stars recommends concrete steps to avoid this kind of abuse. They recommend not setting up situations which make it more likely that interpersonal boundaries will be violated. These include code of conduct topics I mentioned earlier, taking sex off the table as a topic, or at least taking it off the table in talks that aren't headlined as about sex. That takes away abusers' cover. Individually, talking about sex or fantasies in otherwise non-sexual settings is one way that victims are made to feel sexual contact with the abuser is normal. This is part of what I mean when I say we need to step away from the sexiness of hacking. Setting a code of conduct that asks people to be respectful in how they talk about race, sexual orientation, and gender can also make it clearer when somebody transgresses these boundaries. The authors of No More Rock Stars recommend establishing rules about romantic relationships between organizers of events or leaders of organizations. Setting these boundaries can leave less room for someone abusive to bully others and pass it off as normal or reasonable. If we establish boundaries around alcohol or drug use, there are fewer opportunities for an abuser to take advantage of someone who's incapacitated, or worse, as has happened in some cases in our community, for someone to drug people's drinks without being detected. There are also steps to take against abusers who manipulate the power and knowledge of hacking. We can call people out for monopolizing attention and credit. There's the one that I'm sitting in, and there's all the other ones that I'm touching and not actually occupying, right? If someone spends time making themselves look big rather than furthering the work that needs to be done, call them out. If they're monopolizing conversation, call them out, even if they're the hotshot everyone else is referring to. For example, one abuser was known for what people laughingly called story time with him, once taking up 45 minutes of airtime in a series of 5-minute lightning talks. I don't even know how that happens, but if someone is stepping up to be the spokesman at every public opportunity, find a way to support other people in becoming a spokesman. Suggest someone else speak to the journalist or give the talk at that conference. The press also needs to help us on this. If you're a journalist, stop building hacker profiles on the Mystique. For that matter, stop basing profiles on individuals. Ask to speak with a number of people doing concrete work. Cookie licking is another problematic rock star behavior, meaning doing what some kids do to own all the treats, licking every cookie on the plate and putting it back. It's mine now. When someone volunteers to do a lot of work on a project, then fails to do it, or refuses to make their work available to others on the project, that's essentially cookie licking. I once watched Jake extract a tracker that he claimed had been placed on the car of an activist who had already been exploited in an abusive relationship. She had been dating an undercover cop. Jake then insisted on analyzing the tracker himself, and that frustrated the organizers of the event where this happened, who needed to be able to protect everybody else, the hundreds of other activists in attendance, from police surveillance. Again, call this kind of cookie licking out and have plans to distribute work more evenly. To keep abusive rock stars from monopolizing power, build a deep bench of talent. Flatten organizational hierarchy. Make hierarchy and the responsibility of roles explicit too, because nobody's in charge here, man, we're all equals, is usually a lie. This is what they call the tyranny of structurelessness. De facto power structures emerge in groups of people. Part of fairness is making clear what the unwritten rules and power structures are. This is how we make sure that individual people don't become central points of failure, whether they're abusers or just people vulnerable to illness or accident. No one person should have the login credentials for a group project's website or GitHub repo. Hope actually nearly lost a website and lost precious time on a cookie-licking web dev a couple years ago. If there's funders that you're working with in your organization, there should be more than one person talking with them. This is also a good way to keep an organization from the founderitis or founder syndrome that Greg Newby gave a talk about some years back. If there's finances involved, there shouldn't just be a backup plan, there should be transparency into where the money is going and coming from. For example, anyone here know about Hope's finances? Just saying. I think it's worth being wary of anyone who wants to take advantage of the cloak and dagger sexiness of hacking. You're clearly hiding here. Be wary of anyone who brags about the secret and privileged knowledge they have. My current peeve is anyone who talks up the revolution, asking you to toast to it. Jake did that to me. Welcoming you to it. Fuck you, rock stars, seriously. Like, people die in revolutions. This is not sexy, okay? Like, this is not your personal cute joke. When other people around you are romanticizing hacking or making goo-goo eyes over someone who does, point out how unhackerish it is to value people based on their iconic image or alleged skills rather than the work they actually do. So hackers, go forth. Do not conflate sexiness with hacking. Do not confuse contempt and ideological purity with knowledge or belonging, lest you push people out. Think hard about the boundaries you are violating and why do you think it is good to violate them, each one. Rock stars will fail us. Let's distribute knowledge and failure more widely. Hackers, we can do better. Thank you. Thank you. This is really a joint effort. I have to thank everybody who helped me get this talk together. I can't see time. Good God, is it really only 11:30? Did I go that fast? That was like 50 slides. Okay. Great. We got time for talks. Do go to the microphone. That's how ISOC knows to stream your question to the world. Yeah. I'm seeing a question. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
I consider Emmanuel Goldstein a rock star. Don't you think that certain people that have, more than others contributed to community knowledge, just sort of bringing things together, are more deserving than others of being sort of, I think, being put on a pedestal of just going be up and beyond others, for the contributions.
Mm-hmm.
I see where you talked a lot about room for abuse, and I completely agree that there is always room for abuse from those at the top to people below them. But isn't that the exception rather than the rule?
So I think my first question for you, so you may want to stay at the mic for a second, is have you worked closely with Emmanuel Goldstein?
No, but I'm at his conference for the second time, and I think this is a great organization.
Is he the only organizer here?
I just used him as one example.
No, but this is a good point. I mean, this is something I want to pick apart because I think this is a mistake we make, right? We believe that Emmanuel is the only guy here. Frankly, Greg Newby, who was up here earlier, I've helped run the conference a couple of times. I've stopped because for organizing a conference is really hard, and there's there's sometimes abuse that goes on behind the scenes. But frankly, like Greg Newby barely ever takes credit for the work that he does. Greg does amazing work. Our AV team does, there would be no conference with fucking love you guys. My AV team was out until 2 in the morning, and we told them they'd be out by 2. They were probably out until 3, and they were continuing to go. And then Jason, who was out there the whole time, shows up for my talk, and he was probably here earlier. I'm like, what the hell, dude? You're amazing. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is our problem. This is the thing, is we are making rock stars by pretending that there's only one person doing this. And I think it's worth getting closer and understanding how the conference actually runs. I mean, I don't necessarily always want to suggest this to people because honestly, running a conference really is, you put in more energy than you get back in even recognition or, acknowledgement by people hey, you can run a conference. It's a kind of a zero-sum game, but get in close and understand what happens. And be one of those people yourself. And then you'll get a clearer picture that it's not just one rock star. There's a lot of people involved.
I didn't mean to take away from
No, it's okay.
everyone contributing, but there is a sort of a pivotal point where leadership of bringing all the people together. There's a Best Actor award and Best Supporting Actor. I mean, for a
Come on,
movie
do
to
we
be
really
great,
want to
you
be
need
the
a lot of supporting
Oscars? I mean, come on, we're that's not who we are here. No, but seriously, and I don't mean to take away from your question. That was actually a really useful and effective question, and I do think, Yeah, get familiar with the work that people do. And like you said, so there is a role for the convener, right? And for the person who brings people together. It's sort of a figurehead role. Like everybody comes together to rally around this one person. They rally around Chelsea. They rally around Assange at one point. You know, we've rallied around a whole bunch of people. But that's not always the same as the person who does the work, you know? Like, that's frequently not the same as the person who does the work, or which work the person is doing. Like, Emmanuel does run 2600 magazine. He mostly makes off-the-hook work, but there's some other people behind the scenes at Off the Hook, too. And it's worth looking into these things and sort of seeing what actually goes on. Next question.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure everybody gets one of these little booklets here with the
Yeah.
the conference talks.
Oh, yeah.
And when you were mentioning that we should be wary of people who want to, you know, rally you to a cause and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of, you know, I go through this like most people do, and I try to find things that interest me. And I notice that there isn't a lot of rallying to a cause actually in a lot of these talks.
Richard Stallman's still on stage, right?
Is he still really?
Oh, yeah. No, he is. He's getting too, I mean, like,
I think he
and that's
even
the
has an
thing, is they've
after
given him
thing,
2
too.
hours, and I can tell you what he's going to say is, don't say open source software, because he's showed up at my talk just to tell me that. And, you know, and I'm never going to let him fucking live that down, frankly. And, you know, and then he's going to be like, you know, Emacs, Vim, you know, and like, what else is he going to say? Honestly, like, there are people who have sort of outlived, like, do we really need the same person to come in and talk about everybody? There are some amazing, under-recognized people coming up through the ranks who we should be giving more time to. And Stallman,
Right.
fuck yeah!
So-
Thank you. You're my audience. Thank you. You know, like, I shouldn't be up here. I've been up here every single fucking Hope since 2006. Why am I here? You know, like, no, I mean, I'm serious about this. Like, the same people keep showing up at this conference, and there's a lot of younger people doing fantastic organizing. There's people further away from hacking who we should be getting in here. We should bring them here.
That's good. That kind of gets to my point of
Yeah.
you know, even looking at this, we maybe it's not really homogenized in that. Well, I was going to say it's skewed in that direction where we see a lot of people who are, you know, rally for the cause and all
Yeah.
that. And how do we change that? I mean, this I see.
Thank you.
One of the things that I've noticed is I've seen a lot more, a lot less of "look what I did" talks, and a lot more of "oh my God, we have to do something."
That's a really
And-
good point. Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
You know, but a lot of people would also say, and I've heard this counterpoint too, that Hope has always had a political,
Yes.
I don't know, maybe a political flavor to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But on the other hand, you know, flipping back in the other direction, I personally don't believe, you know, in hacking. I think hacking has a pure form, and I believe that by politicizing it or by going rally for the cause and a lot of these things that we might see at Hope this season, kind of might actually detract from, you know, look, you can apply your, it doesn't have to be the
That's
Trump
its own-
people you hack.
That's its own discussion. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, the neutrality of technology, I think, is
So how do
already
we
in
change
question.
this?
Yeah.
You know,
No, that's
as
a
a whole
fantastic
attendance.
question. Yeah. I mean, actually one of the best ways, to be honest, it's actually quite easy to change the content of who shows up at Hope. And I do recommend you all do this. There is some fantastic legwork. As much as he drives me crazy sometimes, Bernie S. tends to like be the guy who goes out and like gets every single person in. And he's actually done a pretty good job of bringing in diversity, despite the fact that he fucking called me hysterical a couple Hopes ago. My womb is not wandering around my body, pressing on organs and make me crazy, okay? Fuck you, right? Don't use that word, not with me. So yeah, but like he does, seriously, he goes out and he finds people. So the way to go and change the face of Hope is to recommend more speakers, and they will take more recommendations. They encourage your friends to send more stuff in. That's really one of the easiest things to do, because all you have to do is be like, hey, you go do a thing, you know? And then sometimes you might have to be like, hey, I have to pay for your airfare now. Like, that can actually be kind of challenging, because we don't, you know, like, we're still a very shoestring kind of a conference. But yeah, I see a mouse, I think.
Hi,
That
guys.
mouse? Hi, mouse. How you
Thank
doing?
you for this extraordinary conversation.
Thank you, my
It's
dear.
well worth having. 2 points, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
The first is how to get more beginners involved. At B-Side Las Vegas, we've got a proving ground. And the proving ground, it takes people who have never given a presentation before but have an idea that they'd like to talk about, matches them with a mentor, they work on the slides, they work on the talk, and then they have a chance to present at Las Vegas. So maybe
Cool.
we can do something like that with Hope as well.
Yes, that would be fantastic.
The second point I wanted was to address the first questioner about the idea of putting people on a pedestal. There's actual neuroscience that shows that when you do that, their brain changes and they begin to listen less and to have far more confidence without questioning themselves.
In addition to what it does to the rest of us, like learned helplessness is a thing. If you begin to sort of go up to somebody and be like, no, you don't know,
Yeah.
maybe you know. Okay, you don't
and-
know. Maybe you know. And then like that confusion makes them be like, I'm just, no, you do your thing. Okay. Yeah,
And
continue.
the second problem with putting someone on a pedestal is they stop contributing. They begin living on the glory of the things that they've
Yeah,
done, but
absolutely.
there's no new ideas coming out of them. And
Yep.
people always have ideas. You never want your brain to get into that position, so don't put people in a position where that's going to happen.
Fantastic points. If you're going to come up and ask a question with no question mark at the end and do two of them, do it like Mouse did. That was fucking great contribution right there. Cool. You guys, this is a great conversation. Let's keep going. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So,
Is that Emmanuel?
that is.
Hi, Emmanuel. Other Emmanuel.